Good day, fellow champions of inclusion. I am Aaron, and this is the Inclusive Dad podcast, where we explore inclusion and make it practical. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join me in exploring ways we can create a more inclusive world together. You are important, you matter, and you can make a difference. Today, my guest is Meagan Sardana. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Did I pronounce your last name right? I forgot to ask you that.
Yes, Sardana.
Okay,
That's perfect. Mhm.
awesome. Why don't you just start us off by just telling us a little bit about yourself?
You bet. I'm a speech language pathologist, and I worked in California schools for about 5 years. And I worked with kids on all sorts of communication skills, and therefore ended up working with a lot of kids who had dyslexia. But instead of working on reading with them, I was working on their oral language skills. And I noticed that their reading, uh, for so many of my students, was not fluent. And these needs were not really being addressed or identified in the school, although these kids, a lot of them had a specific learning disability, and that's an eligibility under which dyslexia falls. It's essentially dyslexia. So, yes, so they weren't being addressed. So I took a deeper dive into dyslexia and into reading systems that specifically work for people with dyslexia. Now I work with adults and children, teaching them how to read.
Awesome, thank you. What is your definition of inclusion?
I would say that we need to remove the barriers to support so that kids and families don't need to have fight to get what they need. And also, we need to stop this failure first policy. So, one of the barriers to support is lack of universal screening for reading. And the state of California this year finally implemented reading screening for kindergarten through second grade. So it's 2026, and we're just doing this now. And another barrier to support would be not using a system of reading that works specifically for people with dyslexia because they read differently and they need to get some fundamental skills before they start.
So when you say there's no universal screening, is that just when they test everybody to see like what their levels are? Is that what you're talking about?
Yes,
Okay.
states are finally implementing that. I think Minnesota started in 2023. So you guys are 3 or 4 years ahead of us. So, yes, and our governor has dyslexia. So it took finally having someone with that language-based reading difficulty, and now finally we're starting to get some support.
Is there like a way that reading that can be taught where people with dyslexia and like people without can all learn to read from that system, or do you have to have a separate system just for people with dyslexia?
Yes, that's a great question. There is a reading system that everyone can use. It's called Orton-Gillingham. And often teachers who teach both typical and dyslexic readers might use this in the classroom for some exercises. And then the person with dyslexia also needs some one-on-one support with an Orton-Gillingham system. So let's break down a little bit what dyslexia is and why they read differently, and that might answer that question even better. So dyslexia is a specific learning disability, and it's characterized by difficulty reading and spelling with speed and accuracy. What's often underlying this is difficulties with some sound system difficulties, such as phonological awareness and phonological processing. So, phonology is the study of the sound system of language. So, these are sound system difficulties. Now, phonological awareness skills are things such as before you can ever read, being able to break down a sentence into words, count the words. For example, if I say the cat is black, a student could identify that there are 4 words in that sentence. They're able to count the number of syllables in a word. And then there's a subset of these phonological awareness skills or sound system skills called phonemic awareness skills. And these are especially important before we start reading. So a phoneme is an individual speech sound, such as b, t, k, and you need to be able to manipulate the sounds of a word in your head before you're ever able to read. So an example would be the word cat. So if I said, take away the k sound from cat, what word would we have? It would be at. And if I said, okay, now add a b sound to the beginning of the word, now what word do we have? It would be bat. And then the most difficult uh, task would be switching out one sound for another. So if I said, exchange a s for the b sound, what word do we have now? And that would be sat. So you have to have all of these skills in order to use what we call a phonics program. And phonics is matching the letter to a sound. And often when we look at the brains of people with dyslexia, now that we have uh, functional MRIs, we're able to look at reading tasks. And we find that there are areas of the brain lit up in typical readers that are not with people who have dyslexia. And one of those areas is the angular gyrus. Now, that's located in the left side of the brain, right in front of the occipital lobe, where we get our visual information. And then it's right above our temporal lobe, which houses our hearing and language areas. So it's where that letter T that we see gets matched with the sound T, and that's not being lit up in people with dyslexia often. And then there's an area right below that called our word form area. So after we see a sound, after we see a word, many times we're able to recognize that word as a whole word. And so people with dyslexia are compensating with more right brain activity. So again, so you can't match that letter to a sound, you're not ready to start a phonics program. But once you are, a phonics program is the best program to use. But you're not going to be able to learn it in a traditional phonics way. So, and
Yeah.
yeah.
Thanks for the explanation.
hmm
So what kind of got you? Why did you want to be a speech language pathologist, or what got you into that?
So I love languages and language in general, and I love teaching. And so this was really a natural fit for me. I didn't come to it young. Went to grad school starting my 50s. And so I made some mistakes with my own kids now, which really helps me in educating parents because I know what I missed and I know what I want to convey to parents. And I really like working with parents too and educating parents.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. Yeah, I mean it is interesting. Like if you go to college, like right after high school versus later in life, yeah, like I mean, and I guess I never thought about that, but it is true. Like you have those life experiences already with, then you learn that stuff. So yeah, you have a different perspective than somebody just fresh out of high school. Interesting.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. hmm
What signs of dyslexia do we see most often in children, and how early can they appear?
They can appear as soon as they're supposed to start talking. And I say supposed to because sometimes being a late talker can be a sign that you will have dyslexia. So it's hard sometimes to differentiate between developmental language disorder and dyslexia. And some of these would fit for both. And sometimes you have pure dyslexia, and sometimes it's accompanied by developmental language disorder. So another sign might be difficulty acquiring vocabulary and or mixing up some uh, category vocabulary items in a category. For example, uh, if you were thinking of tornado, you might say volcano. Now, you know perfectly well what each of those is, but you just mix up the words because they have a similar ending. Another sign might be difficulty following directions, concepts such as before and after, and right and left. And you might have difficulty with multisyllabic words, both when you go to read and speaking. Another sign that you might also have dyslexia and a sound disorder or an auditory processing disorder is you might mix up the sounds of the word. Now, a lot of kids, that's normal developmentally, of course. And so a lot of kids will say biscotti instead of spaghetti. And that's fine up to a certain age. But if that persists, then that might be a sign.
Yeah, thank you for that. Well, my show is about inclusion, so I mean, if somebody has dyslexia, what are ways that they would maybe not be included or, feel like they're excluded? How does it like present itself in school or life as kind of an exclusionary thing?
Definitely. So it's very important for students with dyslexia to understand what they're good at. And we'll talk about that in a second. But how this might show up in the classroom is, let's say you're in first grade, second grade. A lot of kids don't with dyslexia don't get identified till third grade, because that's when you really see that, oh, this isn't just getting used to reading, it's a difficulty reading. And so you might be reading out loud in class and reading slowly, having difficulty sounding out the words, and you might hear a heavy sigh from another student. Right? Or a student might say, hurry up. Or they might say off the cuff something like, can't you read? And, uh, and so there's definitely needs to be we need to address that with between student and student. But some of these are natural things that kids do that are going to make someone with dyslexia feel excluded. Now, of course, what do you want to do? You don't want to participate, right? You want to hide. Okay, so now you're not participating, and you're naturally, we all assume or ask ourselves the question, what's wrong with me? So, the most important thing or question that a parent with this child with dyslexia or a child with dyslexia themselves, the most important question you can ask is, what is right with me? Because we're in a time when we're talking about neurodiversity, and neurodiversity just means brain differences. So that if we're going to define this in a neurodiverse way, we need to lead with strengths. And people with dyslexia have many strengths. For example, they might be incredible visual thinkers. Steven Spielberg has dyslexia, and he credits his dyslexia with his visual thinking and his ability to translate what he sees in his brain to what we see on the screen. Another strength that's related to that might be your ability to see 3D images in your head. So that's spatial awareness. And so our physicists, our engineers, companies are now more familiar with the idea that someone with dyslexia is someone that they might want to pursue. Another thing that people with dyslexia can be very good at is detecting patterns. So that's very important for things or for professions such as linguists and also for computer programmers and processors. And something else that you might be strong at is being a holistic thinker, seeing the big picture. For example, Jamie Oliver, the chef, he has dyslexia, and he went in and completely changed the school lunch system in British schools. And in fact, even got some of the financial support that was needed to do that. And finally, something that people with dyslexia are strong at is empathy. So that doesn't just mean knowing what someone else is feeling, that's great, but it's also being able to read a room and being able to read a situation. So a lot of actors with dyslexia uh, are good with empathy, such as Keira Knightley and Whoopi Goldberg.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Mhm.
I apologize if you already kind of explained this part, but is dyslexia like not being able to read at all or just struggling to read?
I'm so glad you asked that. It's struggling to read. They are definitely able to read, but they don't read the same way we do, and they're not as fluent and maybe not as fast. And that's because instead of sounding it out, they're often looking at the shape of a word. And this is why they might mix up the words form and from, because they have very similar shapes. And of course, they have the same letters. So, yes, people with dyslexia can read.
Gotcha. I was just my brain went to like, well, what if they go to like McDonald's or a restaurant or something where they haven't been and they need to like read the menu? Or I was trying to figure out if they're able to actually figure it out or if they would not be able to, go someplace and know what's on the menu. So thanks for the clarification.
Yes, that's great, and I would say to that, that yes, that might, prevent them even though they can read, they might be,
Yeah,
memorizing things,
right.
or parents might be ordering for them. So, that's another pa place where inclusion becomes an issue.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm gonna have a birthday in a little bit and I'm gonna be 49. So I mean back when I didn't have preschool and we didn't have a lot of the stuff that's around now. And I remember even for me, like reading in front of the class, I've consider myself I would okay reader, but even just doing that is kind of stressful for me. And even or if I'm listening to people, I catch myself like the person if they pause a lot or they're struggling, like it makes me anxious. Is that I'm do they still do a lot of like public reading or standing up to read chunks of books in school nowadays, or are they kind of starting to get away from that?
They do that so that the kids can, get some practice, and so but that does lead me to, a great accommodation for people with dyslexia, and that is if you have an IEP or a 504 plan, then, you want to make sure that the child is not asked to read unless they're raising their hand, because they might be more nervous a certain day or in front of certain people, so that's a great accommodation too. Uh, if you're a teacher on an IEP team to add, or if you're a parent to ask for.
So yeah, my daughter is, let's see, 23, and she we never really had the dyslexia stuff. She qualified under lots of different categories, but I've gone to many of her IEPs and I actually have a friend who um well, I know somebody who has a child that has dyslexia, so I've been into some IEP meetings where dyslexia was talked about. Like, can you maybe go over some common things about, IEPs for people with dyslexia? Where do parents struggle getting like accommodations for their children in that situation?
They do because the school often will, even though they are eligible under specific learning disability, which is essentially dyslexia, I could count on two fingers the number of IEP meetings I've been at where the school actually used the word dyslexia. So, I know, and that's got to change, and so then there's no education for the parent. So then I would guess that you don't know the questions to ask, right, or the accommodations to ask for. So whenever, and I know many parents, already do this, but go home and look up the terms that you don't know in that report, because the reports can be overly, technical, and the language can be difficult to understand. They're formal. So, definitely, if you're not ready to sign the IEP, don't sign it until you've had all your questions answered. And, that said, I do want to say this is a system-wide problem, and it's partly because the states have not provided money specifically for these reading programs for people with dyslexia. And I've worked with so many dedicated professionals in the schools, so I don't want to make it sound like they're not, they don't have empathy. So, yeah.
I it doesn't surprise me that they don't bring up the words. Is it mainly tied then to like they don't want to use the word dyslexia because then parents gonna want them to use a specific like Orton-Gillingham and they don't want to have to pay for it?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, exactly, and that brings me to the fact that now that we are screening and we need to provide, these programs for people with dyslexia, you want just like you said, you wanna use an Orton-Gillingham program. So, Dr. Samuel Orton was a neuropsychiatrist in the 1930s, and Anna Gillingham was a psychologist and teacher in the 1930s, and Dr. Orton did figure out that this was, phonologically or sound system based, and then he figured out ways to help people learn to read. So, essentially, it's a sequential system that's cumulative and multisensory. So, and why is that important? Well, we all have certain modes where of learning that we're better at: visual, auditory, and kinesthetic, which is touch and movement. And so Orton Gillingham incorporates all three of these because they all back each other up. And so that's the type of system that you need in order to learn if you have dyslexia.
So you said like you've been in just very few meetings where they use the word dyslexia. So if parents are like getting these reports, like is there what things should they recognize in the report or what like words, what phrases would be in there that can maybe tip them off maybe that their child does have dyslexia if the school isn't coming out and straight up telling them that they have dyslexia?
Yes, the good news about this is that that's going to be likely the eligibility. So we have different, what we call eligibilities in the IEP system. And that's almost the first thing on the report. That would be specific learning disability. So that's what you want to look at. And then, yeah. And then you can go to also, if you're a parent, once you see that, the best website to go to is the International Dyslexia Association website, and that's dyslexiaida.org. And they have a huge amount of support and materials on there for parents, for educators. It's a very great website.
What was that one again?
Uh,
Dyslexia.
yeah, dyslexiaida.org.
Thank you. I was just trying to type it up and then my brain like went down a different path and I forgot it.
Okay,
So I wanted to make sure I get it correct for the show notes. Thank you.
you bet.
So the SLD category, that is only for just like the only thing under that would be dyslexia, or is there other things that fall under that too?
Yes, usually it's
Okay.
primarily dyslexia or yeah, language-based learning difficulties. Mhm.
I'm not sure if you know this, but is there more states that are there states that are more like dyslexia friendly that you've heard? Like they're more
That
provide more
is an
supports, provide.
excellent question. And I don't have an answer to that. I
Okay.
mostly know what my own state is
Sure.
doing. Yeah, but I
That's
know
no problem.
there's a great film out from I believe last year. Gosh, I'm sorry I don't have the title, but it's about parents in New York uniting and trying to get these reading systems in the public school.
Right.
Yes.
I think I don't know if I'm thinking of a film, but it's one more about inclusion and they were fighting for it in New York too.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Um, what emotional impact does dyslexia have on children and families, and how can adults support both literacy and self-esteem?
Okay, so we talked before about how the child's self-esteem is really affected if they feel rejected in class and they don't want to participate. And dyslexia often, but not always, it's often genetic. So a parent might feel guilty, like I quote unquote gave this to my kid. And so it's particularly important for a parent to know that they didn't do anything wrong. And we're changing our minds in the way we think about dyslexia, that there actually is nothing wrong. It's just a difference. So, things you can do to support your child, I'm so glad you asked this, for whoever you are, before they ever start reading, is to have them listen to books. So you read and read with your child. Why? Why is that important? Because this is going to expose them to vocabulary. And vocabulary is the number one indicator of whether you'll be successful in school. So, and then of course, if it's a book, vice a video that they're watching, you are going to get much richer language, a lot more complex sentences, so you have that syntax, so that's so important. So what I like to tell parents is find a fun series that you like and then play those in the car instead of having your child watch a video. Because we all need a break as a parent, but you're really surrounding and bombarding your kid with rich language if they're listening to a book. For example, I don't know if you ever listened or your daughter ever listened to the Magic Treehouse series, but
I don't think so.
that's
But
that's a great one where it's about, 2 kids, brother and sister, who have a tree house, and then they go on adventures. They travel in time, and they end up in all different places, so you learn about all different things. And again, that rich language, the more complex, syntax or grammar, and the richness of the vocabulary.
yeah, as you were talking about listening to like audiobooks, I was thinking like, yeah, kids are watching, videos on YouTube all day. So I was going to ask you, so is it just because generally those have much simpler language and less vocabulary that they shouldn't be watching those as much and listening or watching to books?
Exactly, and when you're watching a video or a YouTuber, it's all dialogue. And there's
Right.
nothing
Oh,
describing, okay, while Jack was reading his book, he heard a sound. That's a
right,
complex sentence.
right.
So, yes. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
so
yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Because if you're reading a book, they're describing the scene and you're getting all that stuff, which you wouldn't be getting if it's just a dialogue based. Hmm,
exactly. So,
gotcha.
richness and then that variety with more adjectives and adverbs.
Great. What gives you hope about the future of dyslexia awareness, identification, and instruction?
I would say, okay, now we're aware we have the science, those functional MRI studies. And we're finally getting the remediation and the screening that we need in schools. So those two things really give me hope that we're going to progress with this, and hopefully it will become a systematic, and our kids with dyslexia will start getting help from an early age. Also, I wanted to mention that we other technological advances include speech to text and text to speech. Now, those shouldn't be substitutes for reading and writing, but absolutely use those and let them help you.
Yeah. I've also heard recently that there's some kind of a dyslexia font or like some fonts that are more dyslexic friendly or something.
That's interesting. I'll have to look that up.
Okay.
Yeah, now that you've said that, I don't know about those. So,
Okay.
y-
Yeah,
yeah,
I mean, I don't remember where I think it was somebody I interviewed. They had a book, and I think they're dyslexic, and they published. There's a version of it that's like in a dyslexic font or dyslexic friendly font or something.
excellent. Okay, I learned something new. Oh,
You learn something new.
yes.
Now you can go home or go to sleep or whatever the frick thing is. Awesome. Well, what is one tip you can share to help our listeners be more inclusive today? So just something anybody can start doing today to be more inclusive.
Definitely. Do not assume that difficulty reading is related at all to intelligence, because it's not. So we see so many intelligent people, leaders of industry. We talked about Steven Spielberg, Jamie Oliver, and Governor Gavin Newsom. and there are many more. So, Dyslexia IDA, the International Dyslexia Association website, will have more information on uh, people who are leaders in their field.
Yeah, that is a great tip because something similar. I mean, it's happened to my daughter when we go to like a doctor appointment and they ask, for name and birth date, and they'll look to, she's in a wheelchair, they'll look to me and ask that, and it's like so I'm like, hey, Cece, what's your name and birthday? And she'll say it, and it's like just they're looking at her and making this judgment because she's in a wheelchair, she can't talk, and it's like you should ask her first, and then if she can't, then I'll help her. But like, you should not assume just because somebody is you know, dyslexic or in a wheelchair, assume certain things about their intelligence for sure.
Yes, and I love that you say that because educating when we go to the doctor is a back and forth thing. Parents can help educate providers
Right.
as well.
Yeah, for sure. Where's the best place for everybody to connect with you?
I have a company called By the Book Tutor. So my website is bythebooktutor.com. Yeah, and
I get
you will find resources. Go down to the resources section and you'll find like links to movies and some different resources that will help educate you.
there's is there movies like what kind of movies are there about dyslexia? Like
Yeah, so
okay.
we were talking about the emotional
Yeah.
aspects. So there is a film on there, and you can go and it's kids talking about what they're feeling
Mhm.
and what their experience was.
Well, I have one ready for the last question.
I am.
Do you like spam lunch meat? Yes or no?
Yes.
Wow, that's quick.
And I have to say, I have a friend who lived in Hawaii, and Spam is big in Hawaii, so they incorporate it in all sorts of ways. So,
Yeah,
yes.
I live in southern Minnesota near Austin where they make spam and where the spam museum is located. So I've been asking them to guess that just to see what the reaction is. Usually it's pretty fast yes or pretty fast no. There's a lot of thinking about it usually.
Exactly.
Yeah, my girlfriend, she had gone to Hawaii probably 3 or 4 years ago now, and she sent me a picture of in Walmart where it was like a pallet of spam, and I'm like, we don't even have pallets of spam in the town where they make spam. It's like it's more popular there, I think, than it is in this hometown. So it's kind of funny.
That is funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, uh, we have King's Hawaiian, here, so that's yeah, the factory is here. So that's a great combo if you never had that, you will like it. The Spam with the King's Hawaiian rolls.
Oh, the rolls, you're right. Oh, that's
Yeah,
where you are? Okay, okay.
yeah,
They are good rolls.
yes.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. That's your guys' claim to fame?
Yes, one of them. I live in the Los Angeles area, so
Okay. So you get a lot of
yes.
I live in southern Minnesota where the towns are like 15, 20 miles apart. Yeah,
Okay.
we don't have as many. Well, I mean, I do live 45 minutes from Mayo Clinic, so I guess that's a pretty
Oh,
big one.
yes, very big.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you, Ron. It was so nice talking with you.
For those listening, thank you for allowing me to be part of your journey. It is truly an honor. Please join the podcast newsletter by clicking on the link in the episode description to keep up with the latest episodes. Together, we can make the world more inclusive. Until next time, stay empowered and be a champion for inclusion.